What would you do if, at the most glamorous night of your life, the person you loved most publicly humiliated you with the one person you trusted most? Would you scream, collapse, or beg? Or, would you walk away and write a new destiny for yourself? Tonight, I'll tell you how my husband thought he destroyed me at our company's gala, by flaunting my best friend as his mistress before everyone, but instead, that night became the birth of the strongest version of me. Stay with me until the end, because this story isn't just mine, it might be yours too. The ballroom glittered as if every star in the universe had descended to shine within those walls. Crystal chandeliers hung high, casting a golden glow on the polished marble floor. Waiters glided like shadows, balancing trays of champagne glasses that shimmered under the lights. Laughter and murmurs filled the air, soft music drifted from a grand piano, and everywhere I looked, people were dressed in their finest, smiles fixed like masks, eager to be seen. It was supposed to be my night. I had spent months planning the annual company gala, ensuring every detail was flawless, from the orchids on each table to the string quartet that would play during dinner. My husband, Adrian, was the CEO, but in truth, I had carried most of the weight behind the scenes. For years, I'd been the invisible hand polishing his image, smoothing his path, and making sure he looked like the perfect leader. Tonight, I thought, maybe he would finally acknowledge me, not just as his wife, but as the woman who had stood beside him, who had poured her energy and heart into everything he had built. I had chosen my dress carefully. It was a midnight blue gown, elegant but understated, the kind of dress that whispered sophistication without screaming for attention. The silk fabric clung to me just enough to remind myself that I was still a woman, not just someone's wife. I wore my hair in soft waves, and a necklace that had belonged to my mother, something that always gave me courage. When I looked in the mirror before leaving home, I had almost believed in the reflection, a woman glowing with quiet confidence, ready to be seen. And beside me, as always, was Mia, my best friend since college. She was the one who had zipped up my dress, laughed as she handed me a glass of wine to calm my nerves, and assured me that tonight would be unforgettable. "You're going to shine," she had whispered, her eyes bright with excitement. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She had been my anchor through every storm, the one person I trusted without question. The evening unfolded smoothly at first. Guests mingled, investors smiled, and I received polite compliments about how beautiful the ballroom looked. I floated through the crowd, greeting people, feeling that small rush of pride each time someone praised the event. I thought Adrian would arrive any moment, and I imagined the moment he would take my hand, lead me into the spotlight, and acknowledge me as the woman behind the empire. When the doors finally opened and Adrian walked in, the room shifted. He always had that effect. Tall, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo, his dark hair swept back, his jaw set with the kind of confidence that made people believe he owned the world. Heads turned instantly, whispers followed, and admiration sparkled in every gaze. But my smile froze before it could even fully form. He wasn't alone. His hand was intertwined with Mia's, their fingers laced tightly, intimately. They walked side by side like a couple stepping into their own kingdom, her emerald green dress shimmering under the chandeliers, her eyes glowing with a kind of triumph I had never seen before. The breath caught in my throat. My body stiffened, my hands trembling around the glass of champagne I was holding. For a heartbeat, I told myself it had to be a mistake, that maybe they had walked in together by chance, that maybe I was reading too much into the way her body leaned toward his, into the smug tilt of his smile. But deep down, I knew. My soul recognized betrayal before my mind could accept it. The room seemed to blur around me, voices merging into a dull hum. I couldn't hear the music anymore, only the pounding of my own heartbeat. And then, as if to confirm my worst fear, Adrian's voice filled the room, commanding silence. He had taken the microphone, his hand still resting possessively on Mia's waist. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone dripping with charm. "Tonight, we gather not only to celebrate the success of our company but also to honor the people who make it possible. Success is never built alone. It is born from inspiration, from loyalty, from love." My fingers gripped the stem of my glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. I wanted to run, to scream, to demand an explanation, but my feet were rooted to the floor, my body locked in place, forcing me to witness what came next. Adrian turned to Mia, his eyes lingering on her with a softness he had long stopped showing me. "And tonight," he continued, I want to acknowledge the woman who has been my muse, my strength, my constant support. The one who inspires me to be better every day, my Mia." A collective gasp rippled through the room. People glanced from him to me, then back to the two of them standing together like lovers who no longer cared to hide. The betrayal was public, intentional, brutal. I felt as though the floor had opened beneath me. Every memory of laughter with Mia, every whispered secret, every moment I had trusted her with my life, came crashing down like shards of glass. And Adrian, the man I had loved, sacrificed for, stood behind through every storm, had chosen this stage, this night, this moment, to humiliate me in front of everyone. He wanted me to crumble. I saw it in the glint of his eyes, the curve of his smirk. He wanted my tears to fall, for me to break down and confirm to the world that he had all the power. For a second, my vision blurred, my knees weakening under the weight of devastation. But then, something shifted. Somewhere deep within me, a quiet voice whispered, "Don't give him what he wants." I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and forced a smile onto my trembling lips. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my glass in a toast, as if his words had not gutted me, as if I were untouchable. My palms burned from the effort of holding steady, but I clapped politely along with the others, my silence louder than any scream I could have uttered. The room didn't know how to react. Some people's faces showed pity, others avoided my eyes. A few, I noticed, looked at Adrian with thinly veiled disgust. But the only reaction that mattered was his, and I saw it. The flicker of irritation that crossed his expression when he realized I wasn't collapsing. I would not give him that satisfaction. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, smiling, nodding, pretending. Inside, I was breaking apart piece by piece, but no one would see it. Not him, not her, they had taken enough from me. When the last glass was cleared and the music faded, I slipped away quietly. I didn't wait for Adrian to finish his grand display of arrogance, nor did I confront Mia. There was nothing left to say. Some betrayals are so deep that words only cheapen the wound. At home, the silence was deafening. The house that once felt like a place of love now stood hollow, every corner whispering lies. I walked into our bedroom, opened the jewelry box on the vanity, and took off my wedding ring. My fingers felt lighter, though my heart weighed heavier than ever. I placed the ring gently inside, as if closing the lid could also close the chapter of my life that had just ended. Then, with steady hands, I packed a suitcase. Only the essentials, clothes, documents, a few keepsakes. I didn't take much because I no longer wanted anything that reminded me of the life I had shared with him. That life was gone. When I stepped out of the house that night, the air was sharp and cold against my skin, but it felt purer than it had in years. My heart was fractured, bleeding, but it was mine. For the first time in so long, I wasn't his wife or her friend. I was just me, and though I didn't know where I was heading, I knew one thing with absolute certainty, I was never going back. The morning after the gala, I woke up in a small rented apartment whose walls were bare and unfamiliar. Sunlight streamed in through thin curtains, sharp and unforgiving, reminding me that last night had not been a nightmare, it was real. Adrian had humiliated me before the world, Mia had betrayed me, and I had walked away. My eyes burned from hours of holding back tears, my throat raw from the silence I had forced upon myself. I sat at the edge of the bed, clutching a mug of lukewarm coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink, and wondered how I had arrived at this strange version of my life. The phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages poured in, each one like salt against a wound. "Are you okay? Did you know? We're so sorry." Some were disguised as sympathy but read more like curiosity, a hunger for gossip. I ignored them all. I couldn't bear to see my pain reduced to whispers between acquaintances. Even Mia's name flashed across the screen, her words filled with excuses and twisted logic. She wanted me to understand her connection with Adrian, to believe that love had simply bloomed where it shouldn't. I stared at her message until the letters blurred, then deleted it without replying. Some people did not deserve the dignity of an answer. Adrian, predictably, said nothing. His silence was louder than any apology. He believed, as he always had, that I would bend. That I would forgive. That my world revolved around him so completely I had no choice but to return. What he didn't realize was that in flaunting his betrayal, he had given me a gift, the chance to escape without looking back. The first weeks were brutal. Loneliness wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Nights stretched endlessly, the hours marked by the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in the quiet room. I replayed memories like torture. Our wedding vows, the nights we had laughed together, the times Mia and I had sworn we were sisters at heart. How could everything I had trusted, everything I had believed in, crumble so swiftly? There were moments I wanted to scream. Moments I wanted to march into his office, claw at his perfect facade, and demand he look me in the eye and admit what he had done. But each time that urge rose, I reminded myself, confrontation would not give me peace. Walking away had already been my answer. I began to fill my days with work. For years, I had been the silent partner in Adrian's empire, the one who strategized, planned, and advised, all while he stood in the spotlight and claimed the credit. Now, I poured that same skill into building something of my own. I registered a small consultancy firm under my name, something I had dreamed of but never dared attempt. At first, it was little more than a desk in my tiny apartment, a laptop, and a notebook filled with ideas. But as the days passed, something inside me reignited, the fire of purpose, the spark of independence. Clients began to trickle in. At first, they were small businesses, people who had quietly admired my work behind Adrian's shadow. They respected me for my intellect, not my marriage. Each project, each satisfied client, added a brick to the foundation of the new life I was building. And with every success, I felt a piece of myself return, pieces that Adrian's arrogance and Mia's betrayal had tried to strip away. Still, it wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake, suffocated by doubt. Who was I without Adrian? Would I ever be whole again? Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection and barely recognize the woman staring back at me, her eyes tired, her smile faint, but her spirit quietly refusing to die. I had to remind myself daily, survival was victory. Progress, no matter how small, was triumph. Months passed. My consultancy grew, slowly but steadily. Word spread that I was reliable, brilliant even. Invitations arrived for conferences, for panels, for collaborations. I began traveling, speaking, standing before crowds who listened, not because of my last name, but because of my words. And somewhere along the way, I stopped defining myself as Adrian's wife. I became, simply, me. Adrian, meanwhile, began to unravel. I heard whispers, though I never sought them out. Investors pulling away, scandals surfacing, deals collapsing under the weight of his arrogance. And Mia, the woman he had flaunted so proudly, soon proved to be as fickle as the applause that once followed him. Their romance became a spectacle, plastered across society pages not as a love story, but as a cautionary tale of betrayal. I didn't rejoice in his downfall, but I also didn't pity him. He was reaping the consequences of the seeds he had sown. One afternoon, nearly a year after that fateful gala, I found myself walking into a high-rise building for a meeting. The elevator doors opened, and there he was. Adrian. Time had not been kind. The sharpness of his jaw had dulled, shadows clung beneath his eyes, and his once confident posture sagged with the weight of failure. For a brief second, our eyes locked, and I saw something I had never expected, disbelief. He had expected me to be broken, to still carry the ashes of humiliation. But what he saw was a woman standing tall, her head high, her presence commanding. I was dressed in a tailored suit, portfolio in hand, walking into a meeting that had nothing to do with him. I was radiant not because of him, but in spite of him. He opened his mouth, perhaps to speak, perhaps to plead, but I didn't let him. I simply offered a calm, polite smile and said, "Thank you, for setting me free." I walked past him, my heels clicking against the polished floor, each step echoing like a declaration. He had expected me to collapse forever, but instead, I had risen higher than he could ever reach. That night, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights shimmer like a galaxy at my feet, I realized something profound. The gala had not been the night my life ended. It had been the night my real life began. Adrian's betrayal, Mia's treachery, they had not destroyed me. They had liberated me, and though the scars remained, they were no longer symbols of pain. They were reminders of resilience, of the strength that only reveals itself when everything else falls away. I had thought I would never survive without him. But the truth was, I had only started living once I left. And to anyone who has ever been betrayed, humiliated, or underestimated, know this: your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. Sometimes, the people who break you are the very reason you discover the unshakable power inside yourself. Do not collapse. Do not beg. Stand tall. Walk away. And build the life they never imagined you could.